First, guys, thank you for taking the time and checking into this live stream. And in this stream, I will just do unscripted. So this is not like a scripted tutorial video. So excuse my speaking patterns and when I need to do something or recoup from a sentence. This is all live, unscripted. I will just go as I see fit, and we will just explore, so to say, all together finalRender free version. So what is finalRender free? It's our free version of finalRender. It uses one rendering device, so you can decide at any time you want to use a CPU or GPU. I will show you how that works, and everyone can use it. It has no feature restrictions except that you can't render on a network. FileTune is not included in the finalRender free version. But besides that, you can do everything with it. You can render images, you can do commercial work, and if you like it, I hope you will consider getting a license and a subscription for finalRender. Take your time. Check out our other videos and try to learn and understand finalRender. I think it's a great product. I think we have some unique features in there. So if you like the product, I really hope you get on the bandwagon and use finalRender for your projects. So let's now just dive into how we have or how our HDRI workflow looks like. Oh, there's one important announcement I nearly forgot. You need to get the latest version of finalRender free. We just did an update to finalRender free, so if you got it before that update was available, you really need to get it download now. Just go to the downloads and updates, or choose the updates only in the product manager. That will show you that there's a new version of finalRender free, and then you can get the latest version that supports the HDRI. We got right away a report that HDRI isn't working on the free version. Yes, there was a bug in there, so make sure you get the latest version for, and then all you see here, you can do the same with the free version. So let me start now, and we'll see what we can do here. So I have here a simple scene. It's really nothing special or fancy. We have this ground plane. We have this little character here. I actually see that this guy is sticking in the ground a little bit, so let's move him a little bit up. We have the sphere. That's my chrome sphere, and let me just bring up material. So here we have the materials, and maybe we just go to this setup here, and there we go. There we have our materials. So that's our chrome sphere. That's the character. It's just a white color. We don't care about that right now. And that's the ground floor. And so we should be fine. So right now there is no light source in here except the default light. So when we go into rendering, we can see we chose finalRender, and you can see that our version right now is 1.4.1. so make sure you get that version. The version 1.4.0 has the HDRI bug, so just make sure you get the latest version or update. So finalRender is set up here. I will go a little bit into the settings, but right now we just work with the default. We want to learn how image-based lighting works and what workflow we have here. So the next important step is always when you get finalRender free and download it and you want to run it the first time and you just see a black image, that might be because you didn't choose the correct render device. So you can choose between graphics cards, you can choose between RTX cards. So if you have an RTX card like a 2080 or a 2070 or whatever versions and variations are out there from NVIDIA, when you click this button, use RTX, you will see it says initializing optics, and then it will only show you the cards that support RTX. And sometimes you will see non-RTX cards there, and that would mean it is the software emulation NVIDIA has in the drivers. So some of the newer cards can use RTX even though they don't have the hardware. So just keep that in mind, that when you press the RTX button, it takes a few seconds depending on your setup, and then it shows you which of your cards support RTX. But for now, I'm just turning off RTX. I'm using CUDA. And because we only use one device, when we switch to CPU, we could also render with CPU. It turns off the GPU. So the free version only allows you to switch either GPU or CPU. So let me just keep that on for now. I'm using the CPU for now, but I will switch back because we don't want to change our or stress our streaming PC or things we have here. And by the way, if you have questions or want to know something, just type it in the chat, and I'll hope I won't miss it, and I'll try to answer any questions you might have. So that's the CPU rendering. As I said, we in the GPU settings, when we go here, I activated the CPU, but I want to render from now on with the graphics card, the GPU. So I switch to the GPU. I'll press render again, and we can see it's the same result, much faster right now. But as we can see, it's the default lights. We have nothing right now here working. So let me just do one thing here before we dive into everything. I'll go in here. That is going to here. Okay, that should stop the sounds of my phone. I'm sorry for that, but as I said, this is a first YouTube setup we have here. So now let's talk about HDRI. How do we get HDRI or image-based lighting? So the first thing is we need an HDRI map. And I'm going to bring in an HDRI map. So I'll open the material editor, and I'll just bring in an HDRI map. So let me just drag and drop our map right in here, and we'll see that we have the map right in here. It's in here in the diffuse channel. I just want to have the map alone in a material editor so that we have the pure map. And from this map, we will start working. So that's my HDR format or file. We can have a look on the HDR file, and we can check how it works. So what we use in fR-RayRender Free is the standard 3D Studio Max workflow. So if you already know how it works in 3D Studio Max, you're fine with fR-RayRender Free. However, I'm going to explain, because sometimes the users come from different renderers and they do all kinds of weird and crazy stuff with HDRI. So I'm just showing you how it works in 3D Studio Max, and that's practically also how it works in fR-RayRender Free. So we're using the standard HDRI loader in 3D Studio Max. That's the bitmap loader, and it allows you to adjust your HDRI and do whatever you want to the image and picture, and you have all the tools in 3D Studio Max as well. So you just select the file and go to setup, or it brings up the setup when you load it the first time. So hopefully, if you keep the gamma correction at automatic, it won't touch it, because usually 3D Studio Max should know that an HDRI is nothing you want to gamma correct. So that's it. We have our HDRI image in there, and now what we can do is we can check our HDRI image. Let me just check and view the image, and yes, we get this beautiful HDRI, and we see the sun and blue sky and the road and all this. So looks good, I would say. However, let's have a look at the values, because we know HDRI images are multi-stop images, so you get a high dynamic range. And let's say you should get a high dynamic range in your image, but let's check for it. So we just right click in here, and we can see here, when you look at the RGB values, or even you look at the mono level, we're around 0.13 or 0.26 for the blue in the sky. So do we think that's an HDRI image? How bright is the sky? That's the question. And how bright is the road? So the road is 0.04. And we have a white here, this white strip, it's 0.8. So do we think this is something we can work with? Not really, and that's the main issue with HDRI or image-based lighting. All the images you get, they are just crap and whatever fantasy values. So we have to live with that, unless we know ourselves how we do HDRI images on our own. We have to always look and be careful with HDRI images, because usually you want a high dynamic range, and that means that the sun should be brighter than the sky, and the sky should be brighter than your ground, and so on. Let's have a look at the sun. So we can see, oh, the sun is bright. So we get here a mono multiplier about 30. Let me peak 35, 36 in the blue, red 18. So, but I can't get higher. So we have somehow a difference between the sun is 38, let's say in the blue 38, but in the mono channel, which is all together, 28, 30, 36. So let's say 36. So the sun is at 36, my sky is at 0.3 in the blue, and that is not much of a difference. So that's not, it is a difference, yes, but it's not really that high dynamic range what we want, because the sun is really bright. Believe me, if you look at the sun for some minutes with your own eyes, you get blind. So the sun has the real power in your, or the sun should have the real power in your HDRI. Oh, hello Vipa. Nice that you took the time to join our stream here. So I'm just talking about HDRI and images. So I just imported an HDRI image, and we are evaluating the values in here in the HDRI, and we found this image is not really HDRI. So knowing that, we will keep on working with this image and see what can we do in finalRender 3 to get this image working for our image-based lighting or image-based illumination. So we have this image. A natural approach would be you just go in there, environment, you would drag and drop the image, HDRI image, in the environment background, and then you would just start to render the image. Let me just render the image, and we get that. But that doesn't look like the image is illuminating or doing anything right now. To confirm that, I'm going to set in the finalRender settings, I'm turning off the default lights. So I don't want any lights in there. That's always a good test. If you are debugging your scenes in finalRender or any renderer, it doesn't matter, that works with all renderers, when you go there, just turn off default lights, and then you know, is there something strange going on? Is something glowing on its own? Is something creating energy it shouldn't, and so on. So just turn off the default lights, then you can be sure when we render now. The only thing we have here is our reflection. That's our background, but we have no illumination, so it doesn't work. So from a HDRI or image-based light illumination viewpoint, just putting the HDRI map in the background won't help us. So finalRender uses the following approach. So we want the background image, that's for sure. But what we also want is the illumination from this image. And there's several, or actually there's only two ways we can work with HDRI images in 3D Studio Max. As I said, we are using the 3D Studio Max approach to HDRI. So one way I'm going to show you is very simple and has great control, is using the daylight system. So what I'm going to do is I go to the lights and then standard, and I'm using the, Skylight. I'm using the Skylight. I'll just click a Skylight helper in here. And now when I go to modify, we can adjust our Skylight. So the first thing is we can set a fixed sky color, any color we want, and we can use that. So right now, keep in mind, we have a skylight illuminating our scene. So it's a constant color, so it works like an ambient occlusion situation or so. And we can also adjust intensities. So let me just pump up the multiplier to 10. We already see in the viewport the change, but we see, okay, so now we actually have a light source. Our sky is the light right now. So that's how you usually do the HDRI workflow. Let me just bring that back to 1. And when we now want to illuminate with an HDRI image, we are just going to drag and drop this image in here. We want to have an instance, so if we change something, it works. And we can already see something is happening in the viewport, so we get pretty good feedback in the viewport. And then we can just render again. And now you saw the sampling sky map. There was one pass where it said sampling sky map, and we already get some sort of HDRI illumination. An important part is the physical camera. You should always use a physical camera with finalRender because it's a physically accurate renderer and it works best with a physical camera. So in the physical camera, we've set real world values. So where you have an f-stop of 8 hundredths of a second and ISO of 100. So that's usually when you are outside with these settings, you should get a pretty good and bright image with these settings. Right now we don't. Let me just bring back our FrameBuffer. Here's the button to bring back our FrameBuffer. So right now we are missing exposure. So I can go into our FrameBuffer and play around with the exposure a little bit to bring out the details and see, okay, how much exposure do I want or really want to get. And we can play on the contrast as well and midtones a little bit and all this. So that's our FrameBuffer control. It works in real time, so we can adjust the image and then save it and use it. So what I want to say is here, right now we are not there. I want to get the result out of the camera, not out of our FrameBuffer adjustments. I want to do that later to fine-tune it and not to do a massive change of the values. So what we could probably do is go back to our Skylight and just bump up the energy a little bit. Let me just bump this up to a value of 5. And it's a little bit brighter right now. Let's bump it up even a little bit more to 10. And yeah, we get now something. However, the issue is right now, our background image didn't change because our light source is the skylight and it's disconnected from the background image. So how do I get my background image brighter and the illumination? So we would do that Very simple. I'll just bump that back to 1. We would go into our bitmap and we can bump the values, all the values in our HDRI image. We can bump this up as well. So we can just go there and I'll bump it up factor 5. You see it real time in the material editor. And now I can just render again. And now our background image is brighter. And we get the illumination as well. So now we have a situation where I can adjust my background image and the illumination will go along. And if that is not enough, I can still, independently of my background image, I can still now bump up a little bit more, let's say 2, the illumination. So now I bumped up my illumination independent of my background image. So that's the important part, because all these HDRI images you can get out there, they're not really perfect all the time, and they're not working in the way you would want to have them work. So that's usually what we get. The only thing I don't like right now in this image is my shadows are not really strong enough. So it still looks like that the shadows are not working. So I'll bump this up a little bit more in the hopes that I get more shadow, a deeper shadow. But it just brightens up everything. So even though that might look like a good illumination of daylight, because you saw the image. Let me just bring back our image here. We view the image. If we were standing there, it's no clouds, sun in the sky, we would be really have a bright situation there, and with a strong straight shadow, sharp shadow. So that's what I would expect to get in this situation, in this illumination situation. And my shadow just doesn't look really, there's something missing. And the reason for it is fR-RayRender tries to analyze the HDRI image, and because fR-RayRender is a physically accurate renderer, you need to be careful about your settings. If there is no bright object in your HDRI, fR-RayRender doesn't know that this is the sun or should be a sun. So fR-RayRender tries to analyze, so that's this one pass where it says sampling HDRI map. It tries to find your bright spots so that it knows, okay, there's actually a light source in your HDRI. So right now that's kind of missing, because the difference between the sky and the sunlight, even though there is a difference, is not high enough to really justify a strong shadow. So it looks, for finalRender or to finalRender free, it looks like more like a cloudy day, so that would create these soft diffuse shadows. So how can we solve that? Because we could now adjust our HDRI image in any image application that allows us to paint us HDRI, but because we are all lazy and we want to have results, I would suggest a different approach. So what we can do is we can increase this imbalance, or create a higher imbalance between the sky and the sun. So I want the sun to be pumped up and the sky stay at the same level. So if the sun would be just a little bit brighter, then we would get a strong shadow. So how do I achieve that? We can easily achieve that by using a color correct, for example. Color correct allows us to modify, manipulate the images a little bit more. So I'm going to do the finalRender color correct. You can use also the standard color correct of 3D Studio Max, but with the finalRender color correct, I just like it much more. It has more controls. And I will keep the old map as a submap. And now what we did is we have the finalRender color correct in there. And all I actually wanted to do is, and we can see here the adjustments in real time. Let me just open that. So we can now increase the balance, or change the balance between the sky and the bright object by reducing the gamma value to 0.5. What it does, it actually increases the contrast. So brighter pixels will get brighter and really dark pixels stay around the same. And so what it does is, let me show you with my hands, the bright pixels will go up faster than the darker pixels. So what we get is a bigger difference between sun and the environment. So I did that right now just by setting it to 0.5, and that's usually a trick you can do with all the other renderers. That's nothing to do with finalRender. That's how you handle HDRI images to get the crispier shadows out there. So I just added these 0.5, and let's just render it again. And you will see now I get the shadows I want. I get these crispy dark shadows, and I want to have these shadows. However, now my skylight is way too strong because I increased the power of the light. So I'll dial it back a little bit. And now we are getting there where I want it to be. Because remember, our original picture or image looks like this. Let me just bring that up again. So it's a clear sky, sun up in the sky. So we should have a pretty bright situation with strong, sharp shadows in there. And this is what we get here right now. So the only thing left, I would say, is how do we get rid of this? I just want to have this character, and this thing should look like it's sitting on the road. So we have a special material for that. And I'm going to, this is our material of the ground. And we are just going there. And there is a weird material in finalRender. And when I say finalRender, I also mean finalRender 3. So there's this weird material where we have the FR-MatteShadowReflection material. I'm going to choose that. And the fR-MatteShadow material, just on its own, will already do something we are after. It will give us the result we are after. So we will now get the shadows, but all other areas are transparent to the background. And we can still see, we are still, in addition to the shadows, we will also get the indirect global illumination effects. However, I think right now that might be even too strong, because that's way too strong. So we can adjust it a little bit here to reduce this effect of the receiving indirect illumination. So now I think that's much better. This material alone, the fR-RaySwitch MatteShadow material, has much more features and much more power, and I will do a separate video for that. So that you can see and understand how it works in other environments and what you can do with that. So that's about it. That's our HDRI workflow. I told you that we have two supported ways to do an HDRI workflow. So let me show the other workflow we have. So that's without the skylight. So if you don't want to use a skylight, but then it gets maybe a little bit more complicated, then we need more maps. But just for the sake of it, let me show how that works. We go into the environment. It's already open. So we're in the environment right now. What we would do is we would use a special material. And a special map, and there's a map called fR-RaySwitch. We will use the ray switcher in here as our background, and in the ray switcher map I use the base map as my background image, and then I can say, okay, I also want the GI to be created with the same map, the reflections with the same map, and refractions with the same map. So now we have a GI map all in the background here, and if I render now, we should probably get the same image. So we have these two workflows. one through the Skylight I showed you, and one just with the map and the RaySwitch. Okay, that's about it. That's how we do HDRI in finalRender, and I will post this video as well on our channels. And I thank you so much that you took the time and followed me along. I will do more streams like that and explain more and more features of finalRender. So once more, thanks for watching, and I'm going to stop the stream right now. Thank you. Goodbye.